So as I'm sure you're all aware, and what we've talked about today, is that data on corruption, and particularly in countries where retail corruption is endemic, is scarce, and primarily based on perception and expert checklists. This is especially apparent when it comes to understanding the scale and monetary value of corruption. Numbers are hard to come by. So let me put a few numbers on the screen. This number is the amount of currency in rupees that would be spent if 62% of the urban population of India, at some point in time, paid the average bribe reported on ipaytobribe.com. This is the same amount that would cover the proposed food security bill. It is 25 times the budget of the entire city in which you are currently visiting, and it is 2.1% of the country's GDP.
As shocking as these numbers may seem, it hits home the criticality of uncovering how deep retail corruption runs and the key lever areas that need to be targeted the most, not only for the people that are affected, but for the robust building of institutions that allow for sustainable growth. As part of these efforts to understand retail corruption in more depth, we've created a set of metrics. The first set, which we are calling the Crowdsourced Retail Bribery Index, or the CRBI, measures the level of corruption as reported on ipaytobribe.com, to inform and engage citizens of the nature and extent of retail corruption in India, and to also allow for better targeting of corruption hot zones and service delivery. Now, the second set, which we are calling the RBI, or Retail Bribery Index, is a set of surveys which seek to ground truth the rates of corruption that were across the country's top metros. Having this first ever comparative data will help create a platform to uncover and confirm the inaccessible realities of corruption, and to better understand whether the trends emerging from the crowdsourced data available on IPAB are representative. This helps us in understanding whether the website can act as a robust indicator of corruption over time.
So what did we find? Let's start with the national level aggregate data and the CRBI scores and move down to the city level. We'll then compare these findings with the RBI survey data, which we have so far completed for 3 of the country's top metros, and which by the end of this calendar year, we will have moved to 20 of the country's top metros. So IPAB data from the past 3 years, which is the length of life of the website, reports approximately 18,000 bribes, totaling over 17 crore in common bribe payment. CRBI scores, which differentially weight the number of bribes paid in total rupee value in a comparative scale from 1 to 10, 1 being the least corrupt and 10 being the most corrupt, indicate, that the top 5 departments in the countries are police, stamps and registration, municipal services, customs, excise and service tax, and education. And we'll be passing around a booklet where you can actually look at the very specific transactions which make up the core of this bulk being spent. Keep in mind these common suspects because you're going to be seeing them fairly frequently throughout the data. Now, in order to compare cities and how they fared in corruption, we took the top 6 cities with the most number of bribe reports on IPAB. There's currently a really wide variation in the total number of bribe reports between cities due to region-specific knowledge about IPAB. Thus, if we scored as before based on the number of reports and rupee values to compare cities, it would be heavily biased, because cities that display higher rates of corruption may actually be due to more knowledge about the website than ground levels of corruption. So in order to overcome this methodological obstacle, we borrowed from a basket of goods approach, which is used to understand purchasing power parity and inflation, and modified it to compare the citizen-facing impact of bribery across cities. So key transactions across cities were compared for their actual service fee versus the bribe fee, and this was put again on a scale from 1 to 10. So our intercity score shows us that in terms of average bribe paid, a rapidly growing smaller city such as Pune sits at the top of the scale, and it's charging its citizens 17.5 times the amount of the actual service rates across key services, with a city like New Delhi not far behind. Bangalore, which has the lowest CRBI score of 2.2, charges an average of 7.5 times more than the actual service rates.
So if we look within the 6 cities of the CRBI and at their top 5 departments, we see a lot of the same departments showing up again and again. As we mentioned, part of the CRBI is an interactive tool called a lifetime of bribes, which estimates the total rupee value of bribes that the average Indian pays throughout their lifetime, giving a personal perspective of the aggregate economic loss to bribery over time. These numbers will change as people enter their average bribe data on the website on each of the key milestone moments in their lives. Now to compare the RBI data, which is the ground truthing survey, to what we have collected for Mumbai, Bangalore, and Delhi to the IPAB data. Overall, we see a lot of the same departments showing up in the top 5 for both survey data and crowdsourced data. So if you can see it there, you see some of those matching up. At the aggregate level, we see police, municipal services, stamps and registration, education, customs, all topping the charts. If we look specifically at Bangalore, all departments but two are the same, and they're extremely close in the percentage breakup. Other cities also show similar trends across departments and specific transactions within these departments, with only a slight variation. Importantly, this is incredibly strong validation that IPAB is a robust platform to infer bribery trends across the country. And as more reports accumulate over time, and as the website continues to expand into vernacular languages and applications usable on a wide range of mobile devices, we expect to see the level of robustness to continue to increase.
So beyond this, the RBI offers a rich picture of other key aspects of retail bribery. So getting to what actually Vivek was saying about understanding what type of people are involved in bribery and if there's any trends that we can see beyond that, we did look into that. So we are trying to understand who is the person who pays a bribe, and is there anything particular about them? So our data tells us, interestingly, that besides gender, which I'll talk about more in a second, there are no strong trends that predict whether a person is more likely to be targeted or complicit in retail bribery. And this is an incredibly important finding because it indicates that bribery is a fairly endemic phenomena in India and affects the so-called every person equally. In terms of gender, our data shows us that males are more likely to interface with departments and even more likely to pay a bribe once there. In our total sample, we had 53% males and 47% females, but by the time they got to the department, it was up to 60 male, 40 female, and by the time they paid a bribe, 65 male and 35 female. Another key finding is that when it came to prior knowledge about the actual service fee, although it would seem that there was somewhat of an even breakup of people who paid a bribe and didn't pay a bribe that had prior knowledge, 74% of people who paid a bribe and had knowledge got their knowledge from word of mouth. Whereas 53% of people who did not pay a bribe knew the correct price of the service fee because it was displayed in the department itself. This is a call to action. This is one of the strongest findings among those who paid a bribe versus those who didn't. Clearly displaying service costs in departments likely has a huge impact on not paying a bribe, larger than if the correct fee is known through word of mouth, internet, etc. This is likely because having the service fees physically displayed in the department allows people to point to them and stand firm in not paying a bribe. Moreover, in terms of number of people who reported paying a bribe versus those who didn't over the past 3 years, survey shows that 13% paying a bribe versus 87% who didn't. What's important to note here is that in corruption studies, it's well known that getting people to accurately respond to bribery rates is incredibly difficult to do. Therefore, like all corruption studies, it is highly likely that this number is underestimated, and that there are even more cases. This is even more the case in India because it is illegal to report that you have paid a bribe. I'll just skip some of getting into the intricacies of that part and move to the fact there's two more key findings. One is about internet access. So this is a fairly well-known fact, but out of the total sample of the 3 cities, only 25% of people had access to the internet, and this is even outside of their home. And 75% of the people thus had no access. Among the highest income ranges, internet access only increased to 40%. So another call to action. Combining online and offline mechanisms for people to report, discuss corruption activities is critical. Internet penetration is still relatively low, even in cities and even among the richest quintiles. And IPAB's penetration of mobile technology and hotlines is in this spirit. Additionally, we find more important data when it comes to bribe reporting. Of all people who paid a bribe, only 23% reported, whereas 77% didn't. And of those 77% who didn't, 65 would have if they knew how. Call to action. Ensure mechanisms whereby people are aware of the pathways to report bribes. Possible mechanisms that allow anonymity, such as IPAB, hotlines, and government phones in departments, will encourage many more people to report. And our last key finding, the final one, revolves around motivation and emotion. We find that the majority of people pay a bribe because they want to avail of the service more quickly. This is up to 60% in most cities, and other key reasons are because they didn't know what else to do, and they didn't know the cost of the service. So another call to action. Initiatives like we heard of today, such as Sakala, which tracks service times and completion of tasks, could be one of the strongest ways to curb people's willingness to pay bribes. A lot of people talk about India as having a so-called culture of corruption that is fed through acceptance. However, the central emotions tied to bribe payment are anger, shame, and helplessness. Moreover, if people are paying bribes, such as you can see in Mumbai, to skirt the rule of law and get away with an action like breaking a traffic rule, you see that the whole emotion shifts more from anger to shame. Both of the reactions of anger, shame, and helplessness across these cities indicate that no matter how deeply penetrating bribe payment is, it's still normatively seen as unethical and wrong. Ending with this finding gives incredibly optimistic hope towards tackling the problem of corruption hand in hand with all the citizens who face the issue but are unable to create systemic change. The more data we have, the more empowered we will all be to do so.